Culture has to change. But when culture changes, as with many other major changes, stability of the organization is weakened for a while. A lot of stress takes place. People are bouncing off the ceilings. They got a lot of energy, but it's pretty undirected at the time. They're looking at your past behavior for clues, and of course it will be misleading because the past behavior is a disconnect from what you're doing now. Control issues and turf battles become endemic. And it's because, the old saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They're stuck in the paradigm. And it's up to you as the leader to move them out of that paradigm and into another one. Are you willing, if you're going to start a social enterprise, to take some reasonable risks? I know every one of you takes risks every day because you're working in this field. And it's a risky field personally and professionally. But here I'm talking about the organization itself, starting a social enterprise or starting earned revenue. There's a myth out there that entrepreneurs love to take risks. It's not really true. There are a few wild people like Richard Branson, but for the most part, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they will take the risks, not necessarily because they love taking the risks. But there have to be some risks involved or you're not really in the game. So as an organization, culturally, are you ready to take some risks? Are you ready to live by the rules of business, not the rules of nonprofits? Because in the nonprofit world, you're in the 11th month of the fiscal year and you're not making your numbers, so what do? You look for an angel, right? You look for a foundation or an individual to cover the shortfall. Well, you don't do that if you're running a social enterprise. You do what needs to be done so the business will survive and thrive. And you'd be surprised how often that leads them to doing the right things. Sometimes the mission, in Jim's case, job creation, and the requirements of the business, sustainability, come into conflict. You have to depersonalize them, and sometimes you have to make decisions about sustainability that temporarily, at least, are in conflict with the mission. Otherwise, you're not even going to be around to talk about the mission 5 years down the road. And are you willing to proceed once you enter this world? It's not a place to tiptoe. You can't just try a little bit. You can't be standing here saying, well, we know, we've been told there's a lot of go, no-go points along the way. It's a conservative planning process. But you can't be saying, okay, I'll go over here to this first one, and then if it's red or green or yellow light, I'm going to stop there for a while and think about it. No, you can't do that. Once you start this stuff and it's a green light, you got to keep going because entrepreneurship works like this. It's not going to wait for you. So you've got to be willing to proceed, yes, conservatively, because there are benchmarks, but not hesitantly. Some of your most loyal, long-term staff members aren't going to get this at all. Even some of them who get it aren't going to buy it. And even some of those who buy it aren't going to be able to do it. You're going to have to make some tough choices and do some compassionate outplacement for their sake and for the sake of your revitalized organization. Tough stuff. You're going to have to open up your control systems. I teach a half-day seminar called Everybody is a CEO, which gets decision-making down to the street. But in most nonprofits, you need 2, 4, 8, 10 yeses before you can get anything done. But again, entrepreneurship is like this. You can't wait for the boss or the executive committee or the board of directors to make a decision. You've got to let the entrepreneur running the program make those decisions on the spot. Unfortunately, in most nonprofits, it works like this. Walker's in charge of meat and Farrell's in charge of potatoes, but if you want to talk about meat and potatoes, you got to come and talk to me. And that matrix management just doesn't work in an entrepreneurial world. Are you willing to kill products or services? The thing that nonprofits are stunned by the most, especially board members, is that if you begin entrepreneurial strategic planning, the first thing you have to learn how to do is how to kill programs. And I'm going to say some more about that in just a couple of minutes. And this last one I'm about to put up may surprise you, but are you going to be willing to make money? You know who the people are who are the most reluctant to see the nonprofit start making money? It's the board members who come from corporations. And they stop me 20 minutes in and say, Jerr, I've already done well over here. I'm over here to do good. And I don't want this to taint that. And I've had some very sad experiences. At one point where a board chair changed right near the end of a business development process I was doing with a group in Seattle, and called the executive director and me into his office and said, we're not going to do that. That's not why I came into the nonprofit world. And I watched the executive director. She shrunk about 4 inches. And all I could do was walk away, because you can't fight that. All you can do is do a rear guard action and try to make changes as time goes by. Remember, culture eats change for breakfast. Culture is the single greatest obstacle. Now, I went over this with a group of 17 yesterday, but this subject is the one that people all over the world tell me is the one that resonates the most with them personally and professionally. I'm talking about 3 different types of leaders, not 3 different types of people, but 3 different types of leaders. Innovators are the dreamers who develop the prototypes. I discovered 35 years ago that I was not an entrepreneur. And it came as a wonderful relief to me, because it meant I didn't have to follow through on my prototypes. My job was to develop the prototypes, and I always was developing 12 of them at the same time. And they were all invisible to everybody else, except for the one that I would pull out and talk about. And at that point, it sounded like the most important thing in the world. And it was at that moment. But the next day, I might pull out another one. Very frustrating to my staff. Very frustrating to my board of directors. Since 1999, I haven't had either a staff or a board of directors, because I'm an innovator. I'm not an entrepreneur. And innovators love to work out the prototypes, to get the kinks out, and then we get bored. And we have 12 going because we know at best 2 of them are going to be successful. So every time one of the other 10 dies, we start a new one. It's like a horse race. We just keep them going. And at a certain point, the entrepreneur arrives, because getting a product to market is very different from building a company that will be sustaining over time. So the entrepreneur is a builder, somebody who creates the company. And this is so important, folks. Understanding the work, which is what innovators do, is not the same as understanding the business that does the work. These are very different kinds of people. They can be strong partners, but they're very different kinds of people. And eventually, the entrepreneurs get bored 5 to 7 years down when they've turned it into a going concern. They want to go and do another one. But while they're there, they're focused laser-like on one thing, not 12 things like an innovator might be. And they think that the life I lead is ridiculous, and I think the life they lead is one I don't want to lead. And then the professional manager comes along to secure the company's future, to install the infrastructure and the warp and the woof of all the stuff that you need to have to make sure the going concern keeps going. I had to sit in a position as a professional manager when I was in the corporate world for 2 years. Every morning when I woke up, my stomach was clenched. I hated that job so badly because it just wasn't me. And I think each of you has to decide as a leader which of these kinds you are. Innovators saved the nonprofit sector in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, finding new routes to old destinations. But as I say in one of my books, they hit a wall in the late 90s. And that was just about the time that the new pair of lenses went on for a lot of board members and senior managers, who then started thinking about earned revenue. And if you're an innovator today, leading a nonprofit organization, and you believe that you have to start doing entrepreneurial stuff, you've got 2 choices. You either have to leave and let them bring in an entrepreneur to run the place, or do what most innovators have done, and that is hire an entrepreneur as the chief operating officer, and then get out of that person's way, okay? Because entrepreneurs don't like to have people looking over their shoulders. I also believe entrepreneurs are born. They can't be made. Now, there was a book a few years ago, the title of which was Entrepreneurs Are Made, Not Born. So there's a difference of opinion here, but I can finesse that. You've probably seen I've been able to finesse a few things already this morning. But I can finesse this because I believe there is such a thing as a latent entrepreneur. And there may be a lot of them here in this room. People who've just never been placed in a position where those entrepreneurial skills could be elicited. Those folks can go to the schools of entrepreneurship, or better yet, go to the school of hard knocks and learn the entrepreneurial skills that you need. But if you're not almost genetically predisposed to being an entrepreneur, don't try to be, or you're going to hurt yourself and you're going to hurt your organization. Find another way to do it. What does an entrepreneur need? What do you suppose an entrepreneur needs more than anything else in order to be successful? Space, elbow room. Everybody else get out of the way. The entrepreneur needs to move, and move quickly. So put somebody in charge, get out of that person's way, let them achieve something that they're personally responsible for. Maybe put it into a skunk works. How many of you know what a skunk works is? Because we had okay, I'll explain. A skunk works is really what happens when, well, during the Second World War, when we had to create new aircraft and do it in secrecy, Lockheed erected a gigantic hangar way out on a tarmac, and you could only get in through one slim little door, and 3 years later, some new airplanes came out, and nobody was able to know anything about them for the 3 years. Well, it's the same principle here. You set up a skunk works, you say to the entrepreneur and his or her team, all right, here's some cash, go over there and don't come back for a year, and then tell us what happened. Now, how many of your board and senior managers are willing to give up that much control right now? That's part of the cultural change. Because you can, even when that happens, you can incubate a social enterprise within a nonprofit for a year or two, but unless you separate it from the parent nonprofit, pretty soon thereafter, you're going to squelch it with your bureaucracy. The social enterprise, I'm not talking just about earned revenue strategies where you might be trying to cover a little bit more of your budget. I'm talking about when you actually start a business that has to be profitable, you better give it the running room it needs. And the second most important thing that an entrepreneur needs, I can't overemphasize it, and it's a culture clash when you bring entrepreneurs into hidebound organizations. It truly is. They need measurement tools. They need immediate feedback so they can change directions. They need rewards for their performance, and then they get restless, and they need new challenges as well. Inc. magazine did a study of what motivates entrepreneurs. 12th place was status. Surprised me. Status means very little to entrepreneurs. Neither does security or privacy or even recognition or contact with employees or even income. Now we get over to see what really matters to them. Contact with the customers, but then self-reliance, flexibility, freedom, control. And the number one thing that motivates an entrepreneur is his or her personal identification with the product or service that he or she is delivering. So, why are nonprofits doing this stuff? What are the projected outcomes? Well, first of all, as I said, I'd say more about this. When Jack Welch took over at General Electric, he went to Peter Drucker, the management guru, and said, what am I going to do? This company is going south quickly. And Jack said, just tell me one thing, don't tell me 10. And Peter said, it's pretty simple, Jack. You've got more than 300 products out there in the world carrying the name General Electric. Look at each one of them. And if it's not number one or number two in the marketplace, kill it. And that's one of the things that Jack Welch did to turn that company around. And when he retired 25 years later, they had 18 product families, not 300. And 8 years later, Drucker started preaching the same gospel to nonprofits, saying if there's one thing nonprofits better learn how to do, it's how to kill programs.